Hello, ninth graders. I miss you all very, very much. Moving on in our poetry packet, we come to On My First Son by Ben Jonson. Important stuff. Ben Jonson probably has one of the most incredible biographies of any poet in our packet. Find Johnson's life fascinating. He's the son of a bricklayer, an orphaned son of a bricklayer. His birth father passes away. His mother remarries. Doesn't want to be a bricklayer, although he's trained in that profession. Becomes a soldier, comes home from the wars, works as an actor, playwright, poet. He's a friend and associate of William Shakespeare. Shakespeare acts in a couple of his plays. He acts in a number of Shakespeare plays. On Shakespeare's death, his friends get together and collect the first portfolio. The preface of the first portfolio is a wonderful poem by Ben Jonson about William Shakespeare. He eventually rises in English society to become the Poet Laureate of England, despite being involved in a couple different political plots. Seems to want to overthrow the British government. He's exonerated of all those charges and ends up becoming the first guy to get a pension from the crown for the rest of his life, based upon the poems that he's written for special, different historic occasions. What do you say about On My First Son? Some important literary techniques. Of course, it's a lyric poem. You're looking at an adult parent examining the complex feelings involved with the death of a young child. It's his oldest son, actually. It's one of the few poems where we can actually point to the speaker being the actual author, and the author being the speaker. Not all poems are autobiographical. This one certainly is. It, of course, has very simple end rhyme, A, B, B, C, C, D, D, E, E, F, throughout the entire poem. It's written in quatrains. We have 3 4-line stanzas for a total of 12 lines, coming in just 2 lines short of being a sonnet, so don't mistakenly call it a sonnet. It's not. Well, sonnet's extremely popular during the Renaissance. A number of different symbols and metaphors that take place throughout the entire poem. Be aware of those. There's also an epitaph. That would be the inscription or the writing on a grave marker or a headstone. And perhaps the most important one, this is hard because we always use it as a symbol of punctuation, but the same term apostrophe also applies to this poem. It's a literary technique. It means addressing a dead or absent person as if present and able to respond. It can be a dead or absent person. It can be an inanimate object. It can be an abstract quality like jealousy or death. Very famous apostrophe is a colleague of Ben Jonson's, John Donne's Death Be Not Proud, Holy Sonnet 10, where he personifies death and addresses it. Ben Jonson's poem, On My First Son. Farewell, thou child of my right hand and joy. My sin was too much hope of thee, love boy. 7 years thou wert lent to me, and I thee pay, exacted by thy fate on the just day. Oh, I could lose all father now, for why will man lament the state he should envy, to have so soon escaped worlds and flesh's rage, and if no other misery, yet age. Rest in soft peace and asked, say here doth lie Ben Jonson, his best piece of poetry, for whose sake henceforth all his vows be such as what he loves may never like too much. Students ask me all the time, Mr. Abernethy, what do you like? What's your favorite piece of literature? And we teach so much. I've taught everything from 7th through 12th grade. If I had to pick one piece of literature that has always moved me from the time I discovered it in college, either Professor Al Voss or Professor Marilyn Desmond, someone in a Renaissance poetry class, introduced me to Ben Jonson and his poetry, to everything I've read up till since then. It's a difficult poem for me to teach because it is so powerful, it is so lyric, and it evokes such powerful feelings. But I've loved it my entire life, and I've loved teaching. It's hard to teach. It's sometimes emotionally gut-wrenching to teach, but it is my favorite piece of poetry, my favorite piece of literature that I get a chance to expose students to. We'll take a break. My son will, I'm sure, do some editing, and I'll probably before he does editing, I'll set you guys up with the document camera. We'll take On My First Son, and we'll mark it up with our annotations. Okay, how you doing, Sachem? It's Mr. Abernethy again. We've set up here with my phone as a document camera. We're on my other whiteboard on my makeshift desk. Up at the top, if we're making a point that this is in fact a lyric poem, one that's heavily based on Jonson's life and biography, you might want to be aware that of the plague. You've, I'm sure, studied it in your social studies classes and stuff. In the early 1600s, Jonson's oldest son dies of this infection. His first son's name, of course, would have been Benjamin, what we would have called Junior here in the modern times, more contemporary times. Move the poem up with my different magnets on it and such. There we go. And there's On My First Son. As I annotate the poem, any stuff about end rhyme I'll put in purple. Anything about lyric bio or the literary technique of epitaph will be in blue. Symbols and metaphors will be in some sort of vaguely purplish reddish color. Up at the top again is my definition of apostrophe. Okay, it's addressing an inanimate object in abstract quality, or a deceased or absent person as if present and able to respond. Of course, it's very different than the term that we use for the piece of punctuation. So I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger for you. There we go. There we go. Okay, so here's On My First Son. We're dealing with lyric and stuff like that. Farewell, thou child of my right hand and joy. Single speaker, single subject. This is a father saying goodbye to his son. It's also going to end up being part of symbol and metaphor. Child of my right hand we got to get back to. What else about lyric, bio, and epitaph? Oh, I could lose all father now. Important line, I think. I could give up all hope of ever being a father again, I think is what Jonson is saying. Rest in soft peace and ask, say, here doth lie Ben Jonson, his best piece of poetry. Again, if his son did have a grave marker, what would the epitaph be on it? What would be the inscription on his grave marker? Of course, it would have his name. Here doth lie Ben Jonson. It's the son, it's also the father, same name as our poet, his best piece of poetry. If that doesn't fully bring home the idea of a single speaker on a single subject, the intense personal thoughts and feelings of a speaker on that subject, I would imagine that line brings home the true focus of the poem. Let's do some of the more mechanical stuff about end rhyme. Of course, joy rhymes with boy. That's going to be our A rhymes. Pay and day, that'll be our B rhymes. Why, envy, rage, age, lie, poetry. I have to strain the rhyme there a little bit. Such and much. A, B, B, C, C, D, D, E, E, F, F. Of course, those are all doubled right there. 4 lines, of course. Stanzas are broken up for us from farewell to exacted, O to age, and rest through much. Wow. Symbols and metaphor. Okay, here we go. Farewell, thou child of my right hand and joy. My sin was too much hope of thee, love boy. Farewell, thou child of my right hand and joy. I've been told, and maybe someone else can double check me on this, that the Hebrew translation of the name Benjamin is child of my right hand. So Jonson is being extremely crafty right here. My right hand. And there's a whole lot of other biblical imagery that, of course, goes on with that in the New Testament. Jesus is always depicted as sitting at the right hand of the Father, if you think of the Holy Trinity. And you talk about someone being your right-hand man, your most capable and your most trusted confidant and friend is the person of your right hand. So he loved his son very, very much. 7 years thou wert lent to me, and I thee pay. We know exactly when his son died. His son dies at the age of 7. Exacted by thy fate on the just day. Talked about Shakespeare possibly passing away on the 23rd of April. Well, apparently young Ben Jonson also dies on his birthday. That's when they have to deal with that horrible tragedy in what should be a day of absolute and total joy and happiness. Oh, I could lose all father now. For why shall man lament the state that he should envy? Talk about complex emotions that a father or an adult would be dealing with. He's making the point that his son, if he is a believer, and he is, Jonson goes through a number of different religious conversions, if you will. Sometimes they're for political expediency, sometimes they're at the end of a difficult, trying time in his life. I mentioned that his biography is fascinating. And at one point he converts at a time when it's not very popular to be Catholic. He converts while in prison to Catholicism. He's preached to by a Catholic priest. Why shall man lament the state that he should envy? Where could a 7-year-old boy go, obviously? What kind of horrible sin could a 7-year-old possibly have committed? None. So his son is obviously going right to heaven. To have so soon escaped the world's and flesh's rage. What is the world and flesh's rage? What is Jonson trying to talk about here? And if no other misery yet age. Shakespeare talks about this in his very famous To Be or Not to Be speech by Hamlet. The slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, dealing with all those things that happen in life that can bring us down, all those things that you have to go through. Heartbreak, someone breaking your heart, someone not loving you back that you are affectionate towards. Failure at something that you truly, truly enjoy. Those would certainly be part of the world's and flesh's rage, and if no other misery yet age. Old age in Jonson's time is not a time of, retirement and enjoying and sightseeing and traveling the world. Old age is a time of really bad health problems, and it was probably very, very painful and difficult. Hopefully we've alleviated that somewhat. Rest in soft peace and asked, say, here doth lie Ben Jonson, his best piece of poetry. Not only is that the epitaph, it's also an incredibly important symbol, incredibly important metaphor. The message is being delivered right here. Here I am a celebrated poet and playwright. At one point in his life, Jonson is able to remain seated in the presence of the king. So this bricklayer, this poor boy, this orphan, his father has passed away before he was born, is able to sit in the presence of the king. The king grants him a pension for the rest of his life, the first writer to ever have that happen. But what's his greatest piece of artwork that he ever created? It's his son. It's not the Million Masks that he wrote for important royal functions. It's not any play he wrote to protest a certain political injustice, and he was one of the first guys to do that and take that risk. It's not anything that came from his pen. His best piece of poetry is his son. Talk about the difference here, and Shakespeare does this as well, the difference between like and love. Also in Hamlet, Shakespeare, or actually the character Hamlet, talks about his uncle being a little more than kin and less than kind. Kind, at this point, being three of a kind, two like. Whatever I love from here on, hopefully is never too much like you. I love you so much, my son, that any child... And Jonson does have a number of other children. In fact, there's another companion poem to this, On My First Daughter. His oldest daughter also dies of some childhood illness. Whatever I love from this point out, I hope is not as much like you or reminds me of you, because that would just be too painful. Obviously a lyric poem, obviously appealing to the intense personal thoughts and feelings of this single speaker. It is an incredibly effective tool, using the apostrophe to address his son, getting to say those last things we always wish we could say to someone when they do pass, if we've missed out on the chance of that. Again, a hard poem for me to teach, emotional poem. When you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, when you even get down just to the surface level of it, it's an incredibly emotional poem. I've always loved it, always liked it, and even before I had children of my own, it moved me in a very powerful way. I hope this helps.